Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, we will hear insights from state and local government topic experts on the best practices for building a secure multi-cloud environment within the state and local agencies. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. ATARC is a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. ATARC provides ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees here today, and also a special thanks to our partners at Red Hat. Before we begin, I want to remind you all to please answer the poll questions as they come up through today's session in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credit. With that, I would like to start off our panel discussion today with a round of introductions from each of our panelists. If you could please share with us a little bit about yourself and what agency you're with and your role over there, that will be a good way to kick things off. So let's start with Keeson, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Kirsten. I'm glad to be here and share my experience in my journey to the cloud. And as you can see already, my photo, where I work and everything, I'm responsible for the Emergency Medical Services Authority IT group. And we are more on just laptop or desktop because we're responsible for all the telecommunication equipments, all the devices that are helping people out there for 41 million people in California, over 164,000 square miles. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Keeson. Let's hear from Bill next.
Hi, good afternoon, Kirsten. Hope you're well. Thank you for having me today on this webinar. So I'm Bill Zielinski. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the city of Dallas, Texas. We're a 9th largest city in the nation, 1.3, 1.4 million people within the boundaries of the city. For my department, we support all 45 departments across the city. So everything from your public safety portfolio, police, fire, emergency services, to we have a couple of airports that we operate, sanitations, water, just about anything that you could think of, we provide those services. And as we look to the future of cities, it really is in the world of having monitors and devices and things that are actually out there in the community that are collecting data and providing us the ability to become much more proactive in the delivery of our services. So this subject of the journey to the cloud and how is it that as we are expanding our reach and moving out of the boundaries of City Hall out into our communities, how is it that we really can leverage cloud to help us be more proactive in the delivery of city services?
Thank you, Bill. Next up, we have representing my state of residence in Florida, James.
Hey, Kirsten, great to be with you. Jamie Grant, for those of you I have not had the pleasure to meet, I'm the Chief Information Officer for the state of Florida. I am responsible for an organization called the Florida Digital Service, which is our most recent attempt to kind of get enterprise technology done right at the state level. The way I kind of explain our responsibilities at the Florida Digital Service is to talk about who my direct reports are by function. So for about another week, I have 4 what I would call technology business functions, in addition to policy and rulemaking responsibilities for the state. Those 4, beginning with the one I only have for one more week, is the last remaining state data center. So as of July 1, I will be out of the infrastructure and operations service provision business, which Bill, I can see you laughing. For anybody who has to be a service provider in that space, losing that business makes life a little bit easier sometimes in some regards. That said, I also have a chief data officer as a direct report. So if you think of that chief data officer for the state of Florida, that role is really hyper-focused on the state's first ever enterprise data catalog to help inventory what data elements we have, where they're located, and then what they mean. So the catalog and dictionary. And so The other part of that, building upon the catalog, is data sharing, interoperability, API as a service, those kind of initiatives. So our data office rather right now is hyper focused on those two initiatives. And then we have something called service experience, which is hyper focused on modernization and project oversight. So we have statutory responsibilities to do project oversight on technology projects in excess of $10 million. That service experience team is intended to really reform that. It's an area that is ripe for opportunity. It also aligns to the modernization efforts, the legislature just having appropriated and the governor just having signed $163 million to do app modernization and cloud migration across the enterprise. And then the last, which often gets the most attention, is cybersecurity. So the state CISO is also a direct report. Obviously, this conversation touches across both my portfolio and the enterprise. So really excited to be here with you today.
Great, thank you so much. And then over to Kevin, please.
Great, thank you so much, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are across the country. I'm Kevin Tunks. I am the Chief Architect and National Technical Advisor for Red Hat State and Local Government here in the US. So very, very happy to be with you all and talk about how some of the technologies that we all have and are using are helping people out as they adopt the cloud, both singular and multi.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. So for folks at home, I have my own set of questions that I'll be going over with our panelists, but please, if you have any that come up as we go along, please send them in the Q&A chat of this webinar and we'll be sure to answer them. So with that, Kevin, I would actually love to start this conversation off with you around strategies. What are some of the best strategies for implementing the adoption of multi-cloud in an agency? Can you please share with us some of your perspective on that?
Absolutely. And again, thank you guys for having me on. I think there's a few different ones, right? Because there is no one strategy that fits all. And everybody is coming at this starting point from a slightly different position, right? So some folks are just trying to get a handle on what are all the technologies, what are all the things that they're using on-prem today. They're trying to get that inventory point. Some are really pushing into the advanced customer experience place, and others are dealing with modernization that are large legacy systems that are at the end of life on their hardware. There's a compelling event to move those to someplace new. So strategy really has to do with tailoring that to where you are today and moving that forward in the journey. And so what we find is that most everyone's staff is fairly saturated with work on just dealing with what they have to do today. So taking a full-fledged move into the cloud or a full-fledged move into modernization with a big lift and shift, with a big motion kind of move, can be really, really difficult. So what we really advocate is an incremental approach wherever possible. Obviously, there's exceptions, but wherever possible. Establish that point of presence in one or more of the clouds where you want to be. Identify the right workloads that are small enough and digestible enough that you can build that momentum as you move there. And find partners, hopefully like Red Hat, that you can partner with to help you gain experience, build the muscle memory that you want to go with as you transform your organization, because it is a process. It is a journey, as we were talking about earlier. That's really kind of the strategy on it. Build those shared services and then incrementally move things out so that you can take advantage of the lessons learned as you incrementally move things into that more modern state.
Thank you, Kevin. James, do you have anything additional you can add around strategies for implementing the adoption of multi-cloud?
Yeah, so I think one thing I'd say is, like, when you see one state, you've seen exactly one state, or one enterprise, you've seen one enterprise, right? So I think one thing I try and remind my team is that issues of the day come and go, principles never change. So when you're talking about your core strategy or your philosophy to the way you're trying to build and manage, there should be some true norths that never change. One example I would give when you're building software is, are you starting with a closed ecosystem in mind or an open ecosystem in mind? And those are two very philosophical different approaches. I believe at some point it becomes very different, difficult for a company to kind of invert from one to the other. And there are plenty of use cases where a closed ecosystem makes sense. There are plenty of use cases where an open ecosystem makes sense. But I think you have to know who you are and kind of what you believe in and what you're trying to do. So the one thing I always say is find your true north, know kind of what your playbook or your core principles are, so that no matter what the issue, the modernization, the project, the crisis, it's all running through a consistent set of principles that your team can apply that can scale. So moving to multi-cloud for us is kind of an issue, right? It's a new thing for us to collectively tackle. It also has to run through that same funnel of kind of principles or core true north that we believe in kind of organizationally as we're trying to build. For us, personally, from a private sector background, but also with what the Florida Digital Service is kind of created to be and how it's situated, we are an open ecosystem believer. So we try very hard not to leverage ourselves to a single vendor. We try very hard to focus on what a vendor does best, and we try and figure out how to let multiple vendors kind of establish an ecosystem that says, hey, you're really great at this function of what we need to modernize. You're really great at this function of what we need to modernize. How can I incentivize both of you to do more of what you're best at and not have to kind of take everything or take nothing? The last thing I'd maybe say on that is, for us, we believe heavily, and this is where I say you got to know kind of both your true north, but also where you are. And I think everything Kevin described, because he is as experienced and knowledgeable as he is, there's a couple of assumptions in his statement that I think he'd agree with. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but his answer assumes that you know the assets under management and the priorities of where you're going. And for us here in Florida, never having been able to establish enterprise technology, right? I don't have a single agency to date that has been able to give me what I would expect from an asset inventory, whether we think of a CMDB in the infrastructure space, or we think of a data catalog that just at an agency level does what we're trying to do at an enterprise level. So I think the one thing I would stress is be committed to discovery and be committed to inventory, and then be committed to give bad news. Be committed to own the fact that a lot of things are end of life, a lot of things are unsupported, and that's actually strengthening your position as a technology executive to get the business executives you may have to report to fund or grant permission to take the innovative steps that are necessary. So when we can quantify it, and when we can explain what happens if we don't make the move, I believe we start to find significant momentum that kind of gets out of the propeller head speak or the geek speak or whatever else people think we talk about, and get to a place where the executives understand that technology and innovation and operation are all really the same thing, as long as we understand the definition of success. So to kind of close the loop on where Kevin's going, where there's some assumptions in what Kevin's giving, there's also some great truth in that you have to know the end destination, and you have to understand what matters to the stakeholders. And then you can prioritize how to make those incremental steps to say this incremental step matters because it's getting me to that end destination.
That's great advice, Jamie. Thank you so much. And Bill, going along with strategies, can you also speak to some lessons learned while adopting multi-cloud that you've experienced?
Yeah, so thanks, Kirsten. So it actually fits in extremely well with what Jamie and Kevin have talked about. And I think I really love the way that Jamie laid that out, as that question about open or closed, right? I think if you start with that kind of principle of are we open and closed in terms of how we view this, what it forces you to do, it really forces you to move away from the question of where are we running our services to a question of what services are we running. And I think that leads you to even, he talked about defining an asset. And I think it even causes you to question what you even define as an asset. Is the service itself and the value that you're delivering, is that the asset, or is it the component parts and pieces, the physical infrastructure that you have put in place on which you might build a service? Is that the asset? And I think asking those fundamental questions and really asking you where the value is being generated leads you to a much different sort of conversation about how you look at your services. And when you do that, I think what you do is you end up starting to talk about things, not where are we running and what we need to do with that physical location, but managing and securing your data, securing your services, having that line of sight into your service and understanding how they are operating, because those boundaries of what now is defining your operational location of run, those boundary lines are really dissolving. And what I have seen over time is that people start with that question of where are we going to run? Are we going to be on premises, or are we going to be, are we going to be in a managed service provider? How are we going to do this? And then you start to try to cram everything you're doing into that box, and you start to make decisions that are not necessarily rational. And so what I've seen a lot of is when people talk about moving to the cloud, they will do things like a lift and shift. Right, I'm just going to take what I'm running in a physical location known as my data center, and I'm going to just shift it over into a cloud service provider. And I'm going to say, I have moved to the cloud, when you really haven't. You're just rehosting your applications or your services in a different location. I would also say that you really need to invest in training, because while you may have really great technical staff who knows what they know as of the day that they know it, if you're really talking about fundamentally changing this view of being open or closed and how you're delivering your services, and you're moving away from managing and maintaining parts and pieces on which you run things, and you're moving more towards what services am I delivering and how are they being delivered, that takes a different mindset and a different training training and development for your staff for how to do that. And then I would say that the last thing is, oftentimes the best answer is it depends. And I think that's what Jamie was getting at, right? Is it depends. When you're taking a look at what service you're trying to deliver, what is your best choice for being able to deliver that? And it may mean a different operational state for each of those different services, as long as you're able to wrap it with, I understand how and where to protect my data and how to manage my data. I understand how to secure those services. I understand how to ensure that I can give a high level of certainty around the run and operation of them. So being open to the idea that we don't need to put some of these decisions up front. We just need to ask the question for whatever service we're trying to deliver, what is the best way to deliver that? And then we apply those principles that Jamie was talking about. If this is the best way to deliver it, how do we apply those other principles around it?
Fantastic. Thank you, Bill, for sharing that with us. And Keeson, I also want to ask you about any lessons learned that haven't previously been mentioned that you could share with us, speaking to your own experience.
Absolutely. And you all have heard, right? Kevin started out saying that the journey to the cloud is a journey. So I want to emphasize that. And then James mentioned that if you maintain your true north, you can zig and zag and you can respond to the situation, and you can still get to where you're going. And then Bill mentioned that you do what makes sense to the business, right? You have to ensure that the value is generated. So I can assure you that those are the lessons that I've learned. What I have learned extra is to understand the detail, right? We all talk about the cloud as if it's one entity. It's not. Are you talking about, software as a service, or platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, or security as a service, or now we have a new thing, everything is a service? So what are we talking about here? So we need to be very clear to our team, and following the same lessons that our speakers have mentioned, one step at a time, right? Make a baby step before you try to run, right? Nobody's going to be born and start running marathon right away. We take baby steps. And I think it's safer because we are talking about change management here. That is not only technology, but it's involved people. I mean, I am a technologist, but I'm always reminding myself and my team that we're doing this for people. We exist at an IT organization exists to serve business, and business are people, and people meaning that change management is hard. People don't like to change, and therefore we need to introduce baby steps. And I'm going to mention a couple of details that I mentioned. I reminded myself and my team that people have a misperception about the cloud. they think, oh, we're going to go to the cloud, we'll be safe, right? I mean, big guy like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, and they're very rich and they're very smart, and that's true. So I want to differentiate between the security of the cloud from the security in the cloud. Security of the cloud belongs to the cloud manufacturer, the provider, right? They ensure that anything that you put in the cloud will be protected. Security in the cloud is your data. When you put in malware into the cloud, the malware will be very well protected, but it's still malware. And therefore it could compromise the data that we are the custodians, right? So in brief, pay attention to detail, pay attention to the users, because we are here to serve them.
Well said. Thank you, Keeson. Let's go ahead and pop up our first poll question. And as a reminder, the audience, please go ahead and answer this for us. It should be up on the screen momentarily. I'll go ahead and read it. Oh, there it is. Which cloud services do you currently use? And we offered a number of different choices. So please go ahead and answer that. And then I want to shift over to our next question. Kevin, I'm going to have you respond to this, please, but could you please speak to some strategies you would recommend when it comes to optimizing your hybrid environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think, like we were saying earlier, right? Everybody's at a different point with this. Some are at that point where they do have multiple clouds or multiple environments that they're working in. And so this is really kind of targeted at folks that have multiple environments that they're currently supporting, whether those are on-prem, multiple data centers on-prem or in the cloud, in one cloud, on-prem and in multiple clouds. We're seeing all those variants and even all the way out to the edge, right? So what we call the edge or what that means to different people is pretty broad, but across all those different environments, that's really for folks that are kind of spread across those that have control over those different spaces. That's really who I'm thinking of when I say this. And a lot of it comes down to finding out ways that you can balance the innovation at the technical level versus the innovation that you can have at the business level, and figuring out where do you put that energy. If that energy is well spent solving a problem at a more technical level, because your use case, whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve, is one that is deeply compliance driven or very unique or somehow separate or different than what others have had to solve. That's a good point to put that energy into a place where you can really spend time meeting those compliance-based requirements or extra security requirements. If, on the other hand, your use case is one where it is a little bit more common, more seen, human resource management issues, business management issues, payroll. There's a myriad of these things, right, that are really common across pretty much all organizations. Those are ones where you can start to go, what complexity can I buy down on the technology side? Where can I buy this process at a reasonable value-based point so I can focus more of my energy on solving the business problem that I'm trying to solve? Maybe that's at the data level, maybe that's at the customer experience or employee experience level that I really want to solve that. But think about really carefully, because a lot of our technology staff, they love to talk about the technology problem. They get a little bit nervous because it's outside of their comfort zone to talk about the business problem. So the strategy I would really say is, depending on what you're looking at, look to simplify the technology problems with builder buy decision making, so that you can leverage things like platform as a service, so that you can leverage, as a service components that you can consume and run where it's appropriate for what you're trying to do. Because if you can get through those, then you can get into that innovation cycle at the business level and start to really drive something that drives that vertical value not just the horizontal value of what you're trying to get at.
Great, thank you, Kevin. So now I want to turn our panelists' attention over to our audience question, if you guys have seen it, but we had David George in the audience. He would like to know that while we're talking about multi-cloud environments, how do your own organizations rationalize the hybrid IT within the broader digital transformation strategy? So public cloud, private cloud, co-location, edge computer. How do your organizations rationalize this hybrid IT within the broader digital transformation strategy? Who from our panel would like to take a swing at that question? I saw Keeson came off mute. Go ahead, Keeson.
Yeah, if I may, I believe that for me at least, it is out of necessity. So we started out, during the COVID-19, and we had to work from home. Some people work in, from California, they went all the way to Florida, for example. Some people went all the way to Hawaii for, just in case you want to know. So we seriously, we have an environment where we need to move to the cloud quickly. And so we look around and what is the service that fits the most, that people need the most every day? I could turn it into a poll question. What is the application that if it goes down, you're not going to be able to do your work, right? Email, right? Imagine that email stops working. Then what you're going to do? Text everybody? No, you can't, right? And you don't have anything. So we go to one cloud at a time, and then we are driven by users as well. So users said, well, I like to use Google Cloud. My children load Google Cloud on my laptop, and that's what I'm going to use. And so we need to be nimble. And this is going back to what James has mentioned, right? Our true north is to serve our customers, and multi-cloud is a necessity, and we make the best of it, and we actually like it, because I, for one, don't want to be locked down into one vendor, right? Because every vendor has their own uniqueness, as you heard already. So that is my 2 cents.
Thank you. And Kevin, did you want to respond to that as well?
I will happily defer to Jamie. I saw he just came off mute. Go ahead, sir.
So I'll say one thing, and my question to the universe in my role is, if anybody can help me rationalize co-location, please call, like right now. Because if I'm at war with anything, it is colo. And if you go back to where I talked about what the digital service is responsible for, it's not just renting out floor tiles, keeping them cool, making sure they don't get wet or catch on fire. We also have to do incident response. And if I have to do incident response again by playing a telephone game of, can anybody tell me what's on it and why it matters? And my hairline was full when I took this job. Co-location is responsible for about 70% of the problems. So I just, my background's not infrastructure. I'm used to paying for somebody to run infrastructure for me, but if somebody can help me understand the rational role of co-location, I'll buy them dinner. I got lots of questions. They can teach me a lot, because it seems to just continuously be an extra set of confusion, documents that are necessary to tell the co-location facility, you're going to let me in to do the job I have to do statutorily. So the laughter a little bit was, I can't rationalize colo. And for anybody that wants to help me eliminate co-location in Florida, you're my friend. If you want to expand colo, you are my enemy. It is that simple. Because it is a major problem on a security front. It also makes it much more difficult for us to do modernization. And so I think we could talk long about colo, but that was maybe one part of it. The second part I'd say, and this again kind of goes to maybe an open or closed question in a little bit of a different way. You can go single vendor and go really, really deep with your cloud strategy. Not only is that not an option for us pragmatically and realistically in Florida, it's not a playbook I'm used to running. I'm an open marketplace ecosystem kind of builder, much more than, drill all the way down and maximize every capability of kind of a single vendor approach. The reason I think that matters is a number of things, and Kason just touched on it. In a totally non-adversarial way, if I have one vendor for something, they're in control. If I have two or more vendors, I'm driving. Marketplaces and market and competition effects are timeless. For all of civilization, markets are undefeated. And so where we can create them and incentivize and reward good behavior and discourage bad behavior, we start to find ourselves incentivizing healthier P&Ls for our partners that are doing the good thing at the loss of vendors who are doing the wrong thing. And that's okay. Like, there is a finite amount of money in this ecosystem. And so if I can put our agencies in our state in a position where we can one day shop for cloud the same way we drive by gas stations, we're doing the right thing, because we're able to look at it and say, hey, look, I'm not going to be held hostage in this environment for a price or a security or a functionality reason. I'm going to have liquidity to go places, and I'm going to have that liquidity to go places based on best value for the constituent, as Kason said. Then I think we've done multi-cloud right. I think that the thing I'd be remiss without saying, we like to talk about the how. We forget a lot of times to talk about the why and the who. And if we're not willing to talk about user stories and understand who the ultimate customer is, then we've failed the design process from the start. And if we get obsessed with the shiny object, then we never understood the why, and we just spend into oblivion with nothing to show for it. And so all of those questions matter, right? But we can't possibly answer our question around cloud or anything else if we're not willing to ask who is it for, and why is it happening, to drive a result that we can then tangibly go back to the legislature, the governor's office, whoever else we report to, City Hall or the mayor, to say, hey, you invested these dollars in me. This is what you have to show for it.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Right, let's go Bill and then Kevin, if you two would still like to respond.
Yeah. All right, so I'll jump in. So just I'll just give an explicit example. I think there's a balance here, right? I think on one hand saying, hey, everybody stop, all of you 45 departments, you really can't move forward with meaningful functionality until I have figured out, as the guru of IT, what the perfect infrastructure is for you to run things, right? You'll be gone quickly if you are standing in the way of forward progress. On the other hand, if you allow the 45 departments to all go out there and kind of increment things into the environment in a wholly unchecked and in a wholly unbalanced sort of way, you're going to find yourself with a lot of complexity. You're going to find yourself with a lot of security vulnerabilities, and you're going to find yourself with a lot of runaway costs that are there. So that balance is looking for those targets of opportunities, because those mission areas of the city, that they are not looking to have conversations about, hey, public safety folks, we're thinking about cameras, but before we move forward with our strategy for cameras, let's make sure everybody's on the same page. And that's something that we're facing here in the city is I have a responsibility for enabling those mission areas to move forward with the capabilities that they need, but also find the way in which we could deliver those services that is in a rational sort of way, right? So I think it really is a balance in saying, how are we going to enable folks to move forward while at the same time addressing those aspects that make this unmaintainable, that make this insecure. And I think finding that place where you can wedge yourself in and begin to not control whether they're moving forward with these things, but calling out from those initiatives, what are the common components or common parts that we can really move forward with in a rapid sort of way that provide the platform on which they can run these services. And again, cameras are a perfect example. If I go out to a corner in the city and there are 7 cameras on the side of one of our buildings, all pointing at exactly the same spot, then I'm not making the progress that I need to, right? Because we shouldn't have 7 different departments with 7 different cameras all looking at the same spot. We should have like one really good kick-ass camera that's meeting everybody's needs, along with the ability to be able to control the flow of that data into whatever processes, whether it's processing it on the edge to be able to create actionable events at that point. If it's bringing it into storage where we're creating streams of metadata that's associated with it, it really is my responsibility to say, we're going to move you forward with the business needs that you have, but I'm going to be on the fly also developing those strategies that are going to allow for us to do that as cost effectively, as securely as we possibly can.
Well said, Bill. Thank you. And Kevin, did you still want to respond?
Yeah, I'll come in real quickly, but now I want to know what those 7 cameras are pointing at, because that tells me it might be really interesting. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, but no, just because I agree with, I particularly agree, Jamie. I think you're spot on, right? Like there's so many of these true north principles that you've got to use, and Bill talked about the why, and Keeson talked about finding that thing, but incrementing and going slowly there. I will say this. I would recommend strongly, don't lock yourself in, right? So go start someplace, because you've got to start, but don't lock yourself in. Assume that as part of your strategy that you're going to have to be multi-cloud. You may choose to go to cloud A, B, or C first, and that's natural because you got a scope limit and you've got to have success and learn something from that. But assume that you're going to have to be able to move, because it's, again, going back to what Jamie was talking about with open market forces, if you get stuck there, if you get so bought into one cloud over another, that really limits your ability to negotiate over time. And having that flexibility is pretty powerful. The final thing I want to mention is essentially what we're talking about is turning your principles into a set of enabling constraints. And by enabling constraints, I mean like rules in a basketball game, or pick your sport of choice. There's a shot clock, you want to be able to increment so that things continue to move and that you have observable points along the way. You want to be able to have like, hey, I know that the basketball, rim is 10 feet high. It doesn't matter which court I go to, it's always the same height. Having some rules of the game allow, as Bill was talking about, multiple agencies to innovate and move forward while still maintaining some controls. So if you're a central IT CIO, you still maintain those security and observability and compliance related areas that you are particularly concerned about.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, let's pop up our second poll question now. It'll be up on our screen momentarily. And great audience question, by the way. If you have more, please go ahead and send them in. Oh, did I just raise my hand? My bad. Okay, there we go. There's our poll question. In your opinion, how important is a hybrid cloud approach to workforce optimization? So audience members, please take a moment to respond to that. And that actually will play into our next question that I would like to bring up. So starting with Bill this time. Bill, how does the hybrid multi-cloud affect workforce optimization? So how would you have answered that poll?
Yeah, so yeah, I already clicked away from it. I think my answer was moderately. Again, at the end of the day, I think what I'm looking to here in the city of Dallas is to really take a look at taking account of what services are we delivering and rendering. How is it that we could take a look at what we have from a technical debt perspective, and what are the right strategies for us to reduce that technical debt, future-proof us, if you will, in terms of how we're delivering those services, and then answering the question, because I always say it depends, right? So based upon what's the best way to deliver a service based upon the particular service, that's going to tell me how I really need to optimize my workforce. If you have what I've started with is a classic workforce that's really centered around maintaining applications that we run out of our old data center, then I'm really going to have to shift how it is that we view the operation of those services. So I do think those decisions you make in and around your utilization of cloud and the particular model for how you deliver those cloud services is going to drive very directly how you need to optimize your workforce. It's a much different set of skills than what has traditionally been here for us.
Thank you. And Jamie, would you like to tack on to that response as well around how does the hybrid multi-cloud affect workforce optimization?
So I, not to disagree with my friend in Texas, I think it's critical, but I think it's less about optimization, and I think it's more about options, which ultimately lead to it, right? So if we really think about, and Kevin touched on it, right? Like, don't get stuck. In a lot of scenarios, you know, cloud vendor A and cloud vendor B offer you the same thing, right? It may be truly apples to apples in some workload assessments. The differentiator then for a value calculation is cost, right? If the perceived benefit is effectively the same, then cost becomes a significant component in the value calculation. The more we create the marketplace, the more we free up capital, find the right fit, and be able to invest in options for our employees, right? So now, instead of cloud vendor A and cloud vendor B coming to me saying, I charge you the same per gig storage to host what you need to host, I have them coming and I have them saying, hey, I've got implementation services I'm going to add to it. Hey, I've got dedicated engineering support. Hey, I'm going to cut my price by 25, 30, 40%. And all of a sudden, the market effects happen where we have the ability to offer our employees and the enterprise more options by the simple fact that competition and a marketplace is happening to reward people that come to the plate and say, hey, look, I'm going to invest in getting your business, and here's how I'm going to get it. So I don't think I disagree with Bill's assessment for the question he was answering. I think I might be answering a little bit of a different question that says maintaining options and liquidity is critical for us so that we don't have to go to any one of those entities, because Bill has the same problem he talked about with his 45. I've got my own kind of close to 45, right? If you go to them and say, guess what, guys, we're going to be an AWS state. You have some that are thrilled and you have some that are ready to pull out the pitchforks. You have to be able to meet that customer where they are. You have to be able to give the options. You have to be able to have liquidity so that no matter what comes at us, we've kind of left ourselves. This is another one of my rules. You always leave yourself enough room to always be right. And my friends give me a hard time as a recovering lawyer, but qualifying language is really, really good sometimes to make sure that you can say, yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about when we said we almost certainly agreed. We almost certainly agreed. And I think the same thing is true when we look at how we pick partners, vendors. Leave yourself enough room to always be able to scale up with a great one and to displace a bad one. And in doing that, I think a hybrid cloud becomes an absolutely critical approach to make sure that we have enough options in the portfolio. So as the son of a Texan and a lover of the Republic out there, I don't want to disagree, but I think maybe see it a little bit differently.
Thank you for offering that perspective, Jamie. All right, we're going to pop up our third and final poll question right now. And this question is going to ask, are you currently running a multi-cloud environment? So audience, please respond to this. Also, we're almost out of time for audience questions, so send them in now. Otherwise, we might run out of time for those. And next, I would like to pivot over to Keeson. Could you please kick us off with this next question that I have? It is around what best practices would you recommend to fully adopt multi-cloud and the edge?
Yes, and I think the best lessons that I've learned in a multi-cloud environment is to make best use of each of them, right? You make an investment, hard-earned budget from your constituency, and the tendency is too easy to just use the, a little bit, 5% of the capability of each cloud. And in my opinion, each cloud has its own advantages. For example, if you're going to talk about the secure access service edge, you need to understand what it is in the first place, and you need to take full advantage of the cloud that is most fit for SaaS, which is what it's pronounced. And by doing that, you can improve security significantly. You can improve the service performance significantly. And that is the lesson that I've learned, is to leverage the strength of each cloud to the best potential.
Fantastic, thank you. Kevin, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think, we've all kind of been talking about there are different strengths and weaknesses for each group. I think the only thing that maybe I would add to it is the length. Applications in state and local government live for a long time. And planning for those to live for a long time means planning for changes that you can't yet, get your head around, right? Because a new algorithm is going to come out in 6 months, a year, 3 years, that suddenly optimizes your how quickly you can distribute your resources in emergency management. Something's going to change that's going to be potentially transformational for each one of those services that you're trying to do. Leave yourself open for those day 2, day 3, year 2, year 3 changes. And this goes to how open, how closed do you want to be? The more open you are, the more loosely coupled, but tightly aligned you can be on strategy and on your technology standards, the more able you are to make small changes along the way that keep your services fresh, keep them secure, and keep them adaptive over time.
Thank you, Kevin. And do either of our other panelists have anything they'd like to add there? Bill?
Yeah, so I'll just jump in. And I think in terms of how you procure these services, I've seen a number of organizations, because procurement and purchasing is sometimes difficult and hard to do, that they take very big bang approaches to the procurement, right? So they will find an integrator who will promise them that they're going to move them to the cloud. They'll put in place very large, hundreds of millions of dollar contracts that lock them in for 10 years, for a decade or more. And they often do it because the bureaucratic processes in government sometimes make it difficult to want to go through those processes. But I think if you take that from a contracting approach, it will prevent all of those things that Kisan and Kevin just talked about, right? So you outline, these are our best practices, this is how you're going to go forward. So the recommendation here is you also have to have a procurement strategy that matches to those things as well.
Great, thank you. Jamie, go ahead.
No, I'll be quick. I want to get to, I was just going to say, I think everybody's covered it. Bill, we can relate these 10-year, $200 million projects. You're implementing something that is antiquated in year 7, and you're stuck for years 8, 9, and 10. It is asinine. If we built roads like it, we would still be on horseback.
Yeah, I like to say, delivering yesterday's technology tomorrow.
Yeah, like next decade, right? Like, I mean, so I think we found another one you could go, but that's a major challenge we're having here in Florida. And I think the only thing I'd add is be outcomes based. You get these buzzwords from the management consultant world or the sales world, and I say this coming from the private sector. JAMA or the New England Journal or CES or some authority thought leader says, like, hey, what everybody needs is blah. In our world today, zero trust. Everything is now zero trust, and you have to step back and go, wait a minute, it's a framework. What do you mean when you say zero trust? Or is that just something you put on a sales slick for me to feel like I'm doing the thing that the thought leader said I'm supposed to do that I may or may not even understand? And so, like, getting down to the brass tacks of why am I doing it? And am I paying for effort or am I paying for outcome? But those are two major things we're fighting with right now in Florida on some major projects that are $10 million, that are 10-year projects. I can quantify this for y'all. As of 2021, from 2005 to 2021, we had 5 $10+ million projects in the state of Florida that were actually canceled. That resulted in $157 million in wasted funds. We had 7 $10 million or more completed IT projects that went over budget, $327.5 million. That's a lot of coin that could have been much better spent if it was better aligned to the why and understanding the objective and paying the partner to get it done rather than for the hour or the line of code.
Thank you, Jamie. Bill, we have an audience question for you specific to having a history with GSA, is there any advantage to working through GSA as a state and local? If you're able to answer that.
Yeah, so there definitely is, right? So previously I was with the General Services Administration. In fact, I was overseeing the organization that handles all of the government-wide contracts, the multiple award schedule for IT. What you really have there is what GSA puts in place is pre-competed contracts that set the floor for terms and conditions and sets the ceiling for pricing. So what that means is that those kind of long runs of negotiations in and around those things have been taken care of. You could still negotiate additional scope and you could still negotiate down price. And in fact, if you don't negotiate down price in putting a secondary contract in place, then you've made a mistake. But they ultimately give you a lot of flexibility in how you structure those contracts. And they give you a very, very large pool, 5,000 plus providers of IT products and services. So that rather than starting at A to get yourself to Z, you might be starting at M and N, and they also bring their expertise from having worked with hundreds and hundreds of different organizations. And not all of their products and services are available to state and locals, but many of them are.
Thank you. And then the last, oh, go ahead, Jamie.
Kirsten, can I just add a perspective? Because Bill, I knew I liked you, but now I think I love you. The hardest part of my job, bar none, and nobody prepped me for this, the hardest part of my job is buying something. The number of former legislators I talk to and people who make a living representing companies trying to do business with the state that fundamentally don't understand procurement process or law is staggering. And what I think is really important to drive home, what Bill at GSA, these alternate contract sources, whether it's GSA or others, the way I explain it to people who are trying to learn it is, it's kind of a line in the sand where a procurement has already been done or it hasn't. So I can either go the route of the RFP and ITN and other alphabet soup to run a formal procurement where I risk going to prison and ending up in a boondoggle. Like, there's no good options that come out of that other than being able to hide in a little blanket that says, I was scared to make a tough decision, or I didn't know how to assess what I really wanted. So I put it out to the world. I forced a procurement process to tell me what I have to have. And now here's a 10-year boondoggle that a systems integrator is going to charge me $200 million for. That's one approach. The other approach is I can go to something that is already competitively procured, in which it's almost impossible to go to prison unless I accept a bribe. And I'm not interested in going to prison, bribes, or anything of the like, but I have this safe environment as long as I'm willing to take risk. And the risk is I picked the wrong thing. So if I build a team that can assess, can understand the why and understand. So anybody trying to do business with the Florida Digital Service that shows up and says, hey, would you put out an RFP, or hey, are you looking to put out an ITN, fundamentally doesn't understand who we are at our DNA and is going to have a really hard time doing business with us, because at every possible turn, and Bill, serious shout out to y'all, I have yet to come in contact with one thing that I need that I haven't been able to get off of an alternate contract source, with one exception, and one took 3 extra months because they were in the process of getting on GSA, which they were subsequently able to get on GSA, and we were able to get it. So we are currently undefeated in getting what we need without having to involve lawyers and all this other crazy stuff. Procurement's hard enough as it is. So major shout out to Bill. Sorry, Kirsten, if I just hijacked, but as a customer of it, I mean, I would have already quit and packed up if I had to deal with ITNs and RFPs to try and solve the state's problems.
And Kirsten, I'll add this really quickly, is that when vendors come to speak with me, one of the very first questions I ask them, what cooperative agreements are you on, and are you on GSA schedule, right? And I will actually coach them on how they go through the process of either getting on Texas DIR, buy board, GSA schedule, and I'll actually give them contacts that they can reach out to, because it will help them in the long run, but it's also helpful to me to have those options available to me.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you. And thank you for sending in the audience question. So last question that we'll have time for is around the gravity of data being collected. How important is the gravity of data being collected? Meaning, how does the data gravity fit into your planning decision process? If any of our panelists would like to speak to that.
I mean, I guess I'll say it, having the cybersecurity responsibilities almost unquantifiable. I think one of the things that I would stress here, and it's probably a panel for a different day with folks smarter than me, but identity and access management, holistically understanding the identity, the importance of seeing the identity of the person, the application, the organization, and the device, understanding that all of those, COVID showed us left and right, that all of those are really important if you want to prevent fraudulent transactions at scale, right? That was kind of a storm. But on a day in, day out basis, you know, I think it's really incumbent on us to understand the gravity. I'll give an example on why I go to identity and access management. From a technology perspective, the shortcut, the easy button is to give every constituent we serve kind of an MRN or an MPI or any other acronym that says, you know, this is your master identity in government. And with this set of credentials, we can go get everything that government has on you. Having cybersecurity responsibilities and having to help lead incident response alongside our state CISO, that notion terrifies me and is not a direction we will go in Florida for both philosophical, but also just baseline security reasons. All of that rooted in the significance of the data we're holding. And so I think on the flip side of it, we understand that federated identity, avoiding the ownership of data where we can avoid the ownership of data by querying for yes, no's, or greater than or less than, instead of the actual data amount, are things that all derive from understanding the almost incalculable, inarticulable gravity of the data we're custodians for that can fundamentally disrupt a person or an organization's operations in a catastrophic or life-changing or entity-changing way.
I'll jump in really quickly and say ditto to everything that Jamie just said from a cyber perspective. But I would also say, I was mentioning earlier about the desire to kind of move our reach further out into the communities and deliver these services in a much more proactive way, rather than waiting for a resident or a business to reach out and say, I need a service. Having those sensors, those eyes, those ears, right, the sniffers that tell us what's happening out in the community allows us to be able to deploy in a very proactive manner, create actionable events at the edge. But that all relies upon your having data that you are appropriately managing, that you're appropriately protecting, and that you can convert that into a stream that helps you predict something or to recognize something that allows for you to take that action. So I think Jamie used incalculable, maybe he used a different term, and growing more so over time, right? I think that the value and the importance of data to daily operations is becoming so critical, especially in a city setting, to be able to deliver services to our residents.
And if I may chime in, I totally agree with James and Bill. I cannot emphasize how important data is to me. Number one, it's just like Bill mentioned, it's business intelligence. You can do more intelligent things with the same piece of data if you mine the data. And second thing that I wanted to remind the audience as well, that data is a very interesting entity. If you have a chair and you lose it, you know you lost it. But if you have data and you lost it, you don't know you lost it. People made a copy and they compromised it when you are not aware until a month later and everything is falling apart. So my 2 cents.
Thank you for that, Kevin.
I'll just say very, very quickly, because I agree with all the panelists on this one. The movement of data can change how we do things. So gravity of data is really something that we have to start thinking about. How do you unlock that data and just provide the right amount of information to the right places at the right time? Often that deals with a very strong API strategy that lets you move and have access with secure access to that data at the right place at the right time. So yeah, appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your insights. So as a final go around, what is one key takeaway that you really think is most important out of this entire conversation that we've had? We've covered a lot of ground, but just one key takeaway that you'd like to end with. So Jamie, maybe we can start the end with you.
Yeah, one thing I would say when you're talking about innovation is fostering a culture. And I tell my team all the time, if you make the same mistake over and over and over every single day, you will eventually get promoted to constituent. If you make no mistakes, you will get promoted to constituent much faster. And I think for those of us that have to lead these kind of innovations, it is truly being willing to delegate and empower and make sure that empowerment and authority and accountability all align, and then be willing to live by it when somebody makes a mistake that really frustrates you. I had one this morning, and it was a well-intentioned mistake for the right reasons. There are no consequences for that. We kind of celebrate it. And I think we have to be willing to always be learning. And I don't know how you do that without being willing to take mistakes.
Thank you. Delegate and empower. I like it. All right, Bill, over to you.
Yeah, I think what I threw out, we touched on it a number of times, is being able to adopt flexible strategies, knowing what your North Star is, what your principles are, ensuring that you're always going back to those. But in terms of your strategy and your tactics towards approaching where you get to in that end goal, having flexible strategies, I think, having lived 30 plus years in government, I think at the point in time that we try to presuppose all those decisions and lock ourselves into kind of a structure, that's when you bureaucratize things, and you're less focused on the outcomes that you're generating, the value you're generating, as opposed to following the guide that you're cemented into. So I think having those flexible strategies and being based in principles and outcomes is gonna benefit you much more over time.
Adopt flexible strategies. Thank you. All right, Keeson, let's hear from you.
In my opinion, the journey to the cloud is the journey, and that you're not alone. Reach out, touch somebody, right? Because today, for example, I got to learn from Kirsten, and I got to learn from Bill, from James. I mean, I love you guys. How did I get so fortunate to be here and learn from you guys? It's a journey, right? Reach out, touch somebody, and ask for help.
Great. Learn from others along the journey. Thank you. And Kevin.
I would say the biggest thing is get started. It doesn't get easier the longer you wait. Find a way to get started, find people that you trust, find ways to experiment and learn and keep moving forward.
Great, thank you. Get started now. All right, well, that brings us to the end of our panel discussions. So I want to thank all of our panelists, of course, for giving us their time here today, and you all at home for participating and sending in your questions. It's really been great, a great hour, and our CPE credit poll is up, so please respond to that. We would like your polls sent to you today. And we have our next webinar that you are able to go ahead and register for. And it is this week, tomorrow, I believe, planning for phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. So if you enjoyed this content, I'm sure you'll enjoy that content, and looking forward to the next one. Everyone have a great week. Bye.
Thanks so much.